And I've been doing some research um, for some things that are going to be published in a year or so. And doing that, a lot of times I get kind of fascinated with some of the new stuff that I see, or some of the stuff that I might not see in my area. And one of the things was electric radiant ceiling heat. Now you might say, well, we see that all the time, and we did. We used to see quite a bit of it here. There are still a lot of neighborhoods that have it in the ceiling. Um, they typically don't use it. They've gone to heat pumps and things like that. Normally, when I think about electric radiant ceiling heat today, I think about that. We have a lot of ceilings coming down because over time, these things have played out. I believe they were all pretty much put together with the nails and so forth, and they were buried into the plaster. The wires were buried into the plaster, and literally some of these things have just collapsed. So they've come down. So in this area, I'm thinking, well, they probably aren't doing too much of that anymore. And then I get into some research and I start finding out there are quite a few new systems out here, things that are going on. And again, things that I really was not, that I was really not aware of. Now, I have seen the panels, the panel heat that you can put in, and now you see that big, thick batch ventilation above everything here, and then you got these panels in. These panels are wired, so they're going to put up the drywall, sheetrock. They're going to be able to start heating this place up after they get it finished up with these panels. I thought that was pretty cool. I made a little bit of a mention of it like I said, in the research I was doing. But as I was getting into it quite a bit more, I found a company that's actually got this now in a film. It basically is a film. You can get it to install if you have you're framing 12-inch on center, 16-inch on center, 24-inch on center, and it literally rolls and staples up. And like I said, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it around here. I contacted the company and we had a conversation the other day on it. Obviously, you always hear this. It's really popular in Europe. Guy told me, he said, I sell a ton of this. I sell a ton of this in Norway and places like that. He said, but we're looking forward to selling it here. He said, because some of the states, and I know some of my New York friends have been telling me recently, they're not going to be able to install gas appliances and, gas heating systems. So some of this stuff might come back, out here. We might start seeing some of this stuff again. And I just thought it was interesting. I thought again, only had a few minutes to talk, so I thought I would bring it up and talk about it. It literally staples. You can see the little tab on the side. It reminds me of how you would, roll out insulation and just staple it on the tab. Little connectors that you connect on the end. And this thing, depending on the size, will put out between like 13 and 25 watts square foot. Again, the guy thinks they're going to start selling a bit of it here. I mean, a lot of people think, well, it's not very efficient heat. It's super efficient heat. I mean, the problem is usually the product costs too much. Every now and then I'll talk to someone and they've got, some pretty low rates, but in our area, it's crazy expensive here for the electric rates. So that's probably always been the biggest drawback. Now, the other thing that people always bring up is, well, why would we put the heat in the ceiling? We're used to putting it under tile or in the floor. We can do that now. A lot of it's done with water. We've got a lot of new products for that. We certainly have the materials that we can put under tile floors. People are doing renovations and things like that. They'll do that. And, you heat the floor up maybe 80 some degrees or whatever. And that takes care of it. Well, this is going to have to be a bit hotter. It's going to have to be quite a bit hotter, but I think it might, take over, in a few places again, especially places that maybe they don't need a lot of heat. So you might start seeing that. Again, I remember when it first came out, I thought this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard of, because you're heating the ceiling and the heat rises and so forth. But this is radiant heat, and it essentially sends the waves, kind of works like the sun, or if you're sitting in front of a campfire, you feel that heat coming off of it. That's essentially what this thing does. And it's going to heat up the ceiling like a big, panel. And so again, something that we haven't seen a lot of. I don't believe we have. I might have some guys in some other parts of the country that see it. It's a huge country. Been to 48 states, and I travel around and I see stuff a lot of times, and I realize, man, just because it's not in your area doesn't mean it's not somewhere else. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting. And if somebody says they think they've got that in the ceiling, you might actually see it in electric form and not just in hot water form. I've put in a lot of boilers over the years, mostly baseboard and radiators. I know when we get up, I saw Steve on here a while ago, and I know Dave's on here. You get up in the northeast part of the country, they're big on boilers up there. We have quite a few boilers here, nowhere near what they have. But it is kind of funny when you'll go to some different places. I've gone out before out in the Midwest and actually said I was going to talk about boilers, and they asked me not to, just talk about gas furnaces. So you will go to different places, and there's a predominant type system that they use in there. And I know they use in the Northeast, they use a ton of boilers and stuff. But we might find some of those other areas where they just need a little bit of heat or something. They might start going with this. Houses are absolutely tighter than they were when this stuff went around the first time. A lot of this stuff was put in the 60s, the 70s. Some of you might even live in neighborhoods where when they came out with this, the house was advertised as total electric. It was gold medallion, and they would put a medallion on the front door, and it was, they had electric appliances, electric water heater, and this electric ceiling heat. They didn't have air conditioning, and today everybody wants air conditioning. I've gone into a lot of these houses when I was in the plumbing and heating business, and people would say, well, we got to have air conditioning. So we would typically, instead of just selling them an air conditioning system, say, hey, why don't you let us go ahead and sell you a heat pump? Since it's essentially just about the same amount of work to put it in. And then you get some of the advantages of the heat pump in the colder months. And of course you'll get your air conditioning, and which is really what they wanted. But it was pretty easy to sell, especially if, like I said, if they weren't well built, the houses weren't well built, they didn't have a lot of insulation of it. It was a very expensive way to operate. But today, we know that these houses are much, much tighter. So it might actually have a better track record this time around. We'll see. But again, it's something that I had no clue. I had no idea it was going to come back around. It's mostly 240 volts, but there's some 120 volt systems as well. But anyway, I just thought that was interesting. I thought I would.
Kenny, we got some comments here. There aren't any questions, but we do have some comments that you may want to respond to. Nick's talking about a temperature control. It gets pretty hot, and so it needs, I guess, a thermostat. And then Rocco is telling us he's seen a lot of this stuff in New England.
In New England, okay, yeah, we just don't see it here, and I'm really surprised. Now he's talking about the electric. He's not talking about the hydronic.
Right.
Yeah, because like I said, the hydronic, I can understand it. And by the way, I'm not exactly sure what the question was on the temperature control, the thermostat. The ceilings have to get a lot hotter than the floors. You're going to have to, you're pushing that heat, that heat's going down in waves. Whereas a floor, obviously you're going to be walking around on the floor. Now, that doesn't mean you're not on a hydronic system in the floor. You might run very hot water, but this might be a system that the tubing is pushed up against the floor. It's not like buried in the floor or just under the tile. It could be all the way under the floor in a crawl space with a big blanket of insulation on it. And those temperatures for the water can be, 150, 160 degrees for systems where it's got to, radiate through that. But normally when it's just on the floor, you're just, probably 85 degrees or something like that. The one of the things that I always remember when I would see these systems out is the old thermostats, the big clunky line voltage thermostats. There's a lot of new stuff out in that area. and it'll likely still be line voltage, but it'll be programmable and so forth.
Could you tell us the name of the manufacturer? I think you said it
now,
earlier.
the one for the film, I think they pronounce it calorique. It's like calorie with, it's a calorique, IQUE, I think is the last part of the name, calorique. So it's just interesting. Like I said, I mean, I've seen the panels. Most of the guys that put the panels between the ceiling joists, they'll run like a strap across to kind of lay it up on the strap, and then when they push the sheetrock underneath and they screw it into the ceiling, it's just basically resting on the back of the sheetrock. This system, you kind of just staple it. Now, I have no idea if there's a way for them to deal with people putting screws through it or something like that later on. I'm sure, just like with the electric system, I mean, we should be able to find the areas that are going to heat up. I mean, today we have a better, again, just like I said, the houses are going to be tighter than they used to be. And in the 60s, I promise you, they didn't walk in the house with an infrared camera and take pictures. So there's going to be a lot more that we can do to this. We used to tell people, hey, you want to find the wires, roll some water on the ceiling and see how it dries out. Well, today we can go in there with, just a few of our electronic devices and do this. So it's a little bit easier.
So we get a lot of comments in the chat over here about New England. Apparently, this is getting to be a thing up there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But can anybody tell me about how long you've seen it up there? Like I said, I'm familiar. I've been up there a few times. I've seen the radiant water systems going in, but I haven't seen these. So if you have an idea about how long you've been seeing them, you guys that have been out in the field.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any responses to that, but
then they're lying.
Kenny, this is Matt in Minneapolis here.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I've only seen them, and I was actually in one of those medallion homes today. In those homes, I the politest way to say this, but I don't get why. I mean, to me, I guess it seemed like a terrible idea then and a worse idea now. I don't understand. Why you would want to put the heat at the ceiling. And of course, keep in mind, ice dams, things like that are a very big issue in trying to maintain an air barrier between the main level and the upstairs. So
sure.
I guess you could maybe put a ceiling fan in to try and move the air to make it more comfortable.
Well, see, that's the thing. Most people look at this and they start thinking convection. We got to move the air and we bring it down. This really goes down in waves of this. Basically works like the sun. It goes down in waves. You can actually create a situation where you have a table in a room. You can get under the table and it's considerably cooler under the table, because the table shields it. But I'm kind of wondering how some of these cameras will work on the system when we've got it on. Would we be able to see like from the ceiling down, how this temperature is actually passing down? But again, I think one of the, it was around here for a long time. A lot of people used it, and they just kind of live with it. But today, the insulation barriers above these things is just way bigger, way thicker than what we ever had, in the 60s. But then again, I mean, some of you guys don't remember the 60s. I know some of you do. And back in the day, I mean, we pulled up in front of the house on 30 cents a gallon. So it was a lot, everything was cheaper as far as the fuel was concerned. But I mean, and when I heard you mention ice dams and stuff like that, sure, absolutely. I can see that would be a problem. But, as I, said, the country is so big and we have so many different things. I mean, a half inch of snow will shut us down here in Hampton Roads. I'm in Virginia Beach. Last year, we had one freeze. I was on Christmas. I rode through to my office. It was cold enough that it froze a backflow device in the front of one of the other offices here. And I pulled in and called the owner and said, hey, you need to get somebody here to shut your water off. That was it. We didn't have another freeze. And so an area like this, it might actually do pretty well. But it's going to be way cheaper than the radiant heat that the hydronic radiant. It's just, I know in New England, it's nothing to spend $50,000, $60,000 on some heating systems around here, they don't want to spend 10, it better cool too. So it's we sell a lot of heat pumps.
Yeah, you were asking about how long it's been around. Rocco is saying for about the last 8 years.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting because I'm like, you know how it is. We all do it. We stumble across stuff, and then it kind of piqued my interest. And then I looked up and realized I'd wasted like 8 hours on this thing looking at it because it just, I had got to the point where I was saying to people, I don't ever see this anymore. And now some guy tells me that, you walk into a house and they tell you got a new system and you're thinking old school. You mean to tell me that they buried the wires in the plaster and they did this and did that? It's just, I just find it interesting. It's something different. And we see systems out here. I've been in the business. Next year will be 50 years. I was in plumbing and heating right out of high school, and things have come and gone. It just depends on what's going on in the world. When first energy crisis, I remember I was switching out houses from oil to gas all the time. We were either changing the burners or changing the entire furnace. And it was super popular. And I would have never thought that whole states and so forth would say no more gas. It's just such a great source of heat. But it is what it is. So what I like to do is at least I'd like to be able to for people to know, what things are, because that's one of the first things I think we should be able to do as home inspectors is say, well, yeah, I understand what this is. So.
Okay, well, Kenny, that's interesting. I guess we're going to keep our eyes out for it. But yeah,
if anybody sees any of this stuff, especially going in or something like that, I'd love to have some pictures of it. Some of the stuff going in and things like that. Because, like I said, I just don't see it. And you can get a hold of me if you've got some information or want to share some of that stuff. I've got an email address now. I've got my own email address, but you can get a hold of me just with Hey Kenny Hart at Gmail.